So this last year that we all just lived, 2024, was the first 2024 that I've ever experienced in my whole life. This was probably the busiest year of my life, and you see part of that in the videos I've been putting out on this channel and the ones that I have prepared for like the first parts of next year. The problem with that is that I'm just flying by the seat of my pants on this video. I don't have a script. I've been up. It was a Sisyphus-esque endeavor of balancing, passion work, like the stuff you're watching now, working a full-time job, and having, some inkling of a social life. So what that has resulted in is I've kind of been out of the loop on about a good 80% of the stuff that came out this year. Like, not so much out of the loop, just out of the first-hand loop. Like, there were many big shows and movies that came out this year that I just didn't get around to watching. And part of that busyness really just, like, I don't want to say it compounded on my, franchise fatigue. Like, this channel is still early in its days and still being defined, but, all of my, or at least the majority of my videos are, like, based around franchises. Like, Marvel, Star Wars, DC, especially Star Wars. But, like, I'm just, like, struggling to care about those these days because it's just been what I would best describe as a very, like, muscular man with a big hammer just smashing it in. And, like, the more it stretches out, the more you can cut up and hand out. But also you're getting the thinnest product possible. So when I was finding time to, watch stuff from this year, those really didn't land high on my priority list, which if you're here to listen to me talk about those, I will talk about some of them. Like, let me just read these off to you. These are the ones that I missed this year. The Penguin, I heard, was great. I'm a big fan of Colin Farrell's portrayal of this character. And I've heard, like I said, I've heard great things about it. I have not gotten around to watching it. Joker 2, Creature Commandos, which I am kind of enthusiastic about. That's a very recent one. That was like beginning of December. Haven't gotten to that one yet. Dune Prophecy is one I've heard great things. I'll talk about Dune Part 2 later. That is one I actually do properly intend to get to, as well as Fallout. I've always thought that Fallout would be like fucking perfect to be translated into a movie or TV show, and by all accounts, they did a really great job at it, and that makes me very happy. So that's one I'm going to be getting to eventually, definitely before Season 2 comes out. Skeleton Crew Star Wars, I've heard decent things about it, but I held off on watching it just because, like, I'm very much over the kind of 80s nostalgia kind of thing that has been all over a bit of everything in the past, decade, basically, since Stranger Things took off. But that's a topic for a different video. So those are the ones I'm indifferent to, and as usual, there were many, many movies and TV shows, original works that I never got the chance to see. I'm currently, as I'm recording this, we're about a little less than 10 days away from the theatrical release of Robert Eggers' Nosferatu and James Mangold's A Complete Unknown, and both of those are movies I'm incredibly excited for, and I'm gonna watch them when they come out. Like, you can make damn well sure of that, I will. I did a video like this for, like, 2021, 2022, I think. I skipped 2023, but I did a top 3 of the year, where I basically just, rank the top 3 things from that year, and I'm not going to do that this year just because I don't feel like I've confidently got a firm grasp on the whole year. Getting through all the rest of the, the beginning video preamble, let's talk about the big franchise releases, because that's what people are most enthusiastic to, hear about. Deadpool and Wolverine was a movie I was, like, moderately anticipating. I'm not the biggest Deadpool head. I didn't really like the first movie, but I liked the second movie a decent bit, and I was ultimately really curious to see how they would bring him into the MCU, and ultimately what I got was them bringing Deadpool into the MCU. It's a very safe movie. The only really risk it takes is the fact that it has blood and cursing, which isn't a risk for the Deadpool, because that's what people are there to see. The R rating is a part of the franchise. That's part of why people pay to go see it. And it slides in pretty seamlessly. Like, it really does feel like an MCU movie, for better or for worse. As everyone says, the main core appeal of this movie is the chemistry between Ryan Reynolds and Hugh Jackman. They're both really funny together. Hugh Jackman, especially, he steals the show. I really don't think the movie would be really watchable without him. Just taking the movie as a comedy movie, I'd say it's below average. As a superhero movie, it's about average. The Bad Batch, the Clone Wars spinoff show, had its final season, and I think it's its best season. And then this is the part where I reveal I didn't quite finish it. Again, this is not because of the quality of the show or because I didn't enjoy it. It's because life got in the way and I just never got around to finishing it. But the parts that I did see, which is just about the whole season, I think I stopped short like 2 episodes. I thoroughly enjoyed it. The Bad Batch is a show that's been like, it's been really enjoyable when it takes itself seriously. It's just always been weak in like the filler style episodes that the Clone Wars had a lot of, and they're about the same level of quality here. They're watchable, but they're not particularly great. But season 3 cuts that down more so than season 2 did. And it's got this kind of darker tone. It's a little bleak. So I absolutely do intend to finish this one because I do enjoy it. And I think for any Clone Wars fans that skipped it, I mean, it's just like more of that kind of thing. And when it's tackling the transition from the Republic to the Empire, it's really fucking cool. On the flip side of Star Wars, we had The Acolyte this year, which I thought was a real mixed bag. Hold your breath here. I didn't finish it, which I forget how far into the season I stopped, but it was a show that I thought had a lot of really cool, interesting core elements, but they never really come together in a way that's well executed. It's a show where you feel the growing pains. I don't know if that's an inexperienced crew and creative direction, or if that's just them trying to find the working parts so they can move forward. It felt like the kind of show that would have had a, messy but intriguing season 1 and then gotten solid from there. Instead, it's just going to end with season 1, which I think is very upsetting because some of the good shit here, the good shit in this show is some of the better stuff that I've seen. I think it's really compelling. I think the villain is fantastic. I think Master Soul is a very fascinating and well-performed character. It really just felt like a show that had to zero in on the parts that worked, and it's never going to get that opportunity, and I think that's kind of a sad thing. Probably the biggest non-superhero or whatever release this year was Dune Part 2, and I was kind of on the fence with Part 1. I enjoyed it, but to me, it was so faithful to the book, and yet so lacking of the nuance of the book that it was kind of like an indifferent experience. Like, it was beautifully made, beautifully acted, but I didn't take much out of the theater experience. Dune 2, on the other hand, makes so many clever choices to condense the narrative. It has this extra drive, particularly in the character of Chani, who's changed from the book, and I think Chani's role in the book is a lot more subtle than what you see in the movie, but I think it complements the more visual and moment-to-moment nature of the cinematic medium, and I think it's going to set up a Part 3 that is more unpredictable. I've never read Dune Messiah, I've only read the original book, but Part 2 really felt like it did an incredible job at taking everything that made the book special and imbuing it with Denis' amazing and gorgeous cinematic style. This movie uses its budget in a way that puts everything else that's come out to shame. It's got stuff that you watch it and it's like in your mind for the rest of your life. It's exciting, it's big, it's grand. This is the kind of experience the theater was made for. It more than does the book justice. This book still is, I think, a more, nuanced and better told story, but, there's only so much you can do with, a near 900-page novel, or however long the book is. Especially one as dense as Dune. I think this is as good as a Dune adaptation is ever going to get. And then the last franchise release was one from earlier in the year. Like, so early in the year, I kind of forgot that it was this year. It was Godzilla x Kong, The New Empire. I did not particularly enjoy the previous Adam Wingard directed Godzilla and Kong movie, and this one is just kind of that one, but worse in a lot of ways. I don't like how the monsters, they feel so small. The action feels so narrow and focused. The Scar King as a villain was so borderline comedically underused and underdeveloped. To me, this movie just feels like such a far cry from the potential and heritage of Godzilla, which some Godzilla fans get territorial about this, but to me, even as silly and as shallow as a lot of the classic Godzilla movies could be, they still had so much character in the way that they were made, and there's just sort of an unquantifiable feeling that you get from the older Godzilla movies, even the dumbest ones. It's the practical effects, it's the classic music by Akira Ifukube, and to me this movie just felt so empty and vapid, and there's not even an appeal to that kind of shallow humanity even, the weaker MCU films poke at. It's just something that I watched and I have not really thought about ever since then. The only times I really think about it is in relation to the other Godzilla movies that I prefer, like -1, which I never got a chance to talk about because, I didn't do the 2023 video, but -1 is But let's talk about the non-franchise movies, because I saw some ones I liked. Let me look at my list, because I didn't write a script to this video. Challengers, what a fucking movie. This movie is just pure, concentrated, well-done character drama. I mean, everyone has said it, but it's got the sweatiest atmosphere I've ever seen. The editing, it makes your heart feel like it's pumping, and like there's pressure when it pumps, and it's not healthy for you, but it's incredibly engaging. The movie really just gives you that feeling of running back and forth on the tennis court, along with, horrible relationship drama. It's beautiful. I saw Smile 2 somewhat recently, and I saw the original not long before that, which the original, it's kind of whatever. It's got some cool moments, cool concept, but overall it's like, kind of a weaker whatever kind of movie. But Smile 2 just has such a great premise, and it feels very timely because of how just fascinated everybody seems to be with pop stars at the moment. And this kind of claustrophobic and paranoid narrative put onto a pop star character just it gives us extra sense of hopelessness. And that's what this movie does best. It feels completely hopeless, completely miserable. The director, I believe his name is Parker Finn, he's having so much more fun here with this movie than in the first movie, which did feel a little restrained and a little held back. And continuing the trend with horror movies, there was The Long Legs with Nicolas Cage in it, and it's got a very cool, eerie vibe, and I think that's when it's at its best. I don't find it particularly scary, and I think the ending leaves a lot to be desired, but for the most part, it's a pretty solid artsy popcorn movie. All right, what else we got? Hitman, which I believe was Richard Linklater, and it's got, what's his name? Is his name Powell? It's got a guy named Powell in it, and this movie really caught me off guard. It does have that kind of Netflix movie vibe, but it does a decent job at keeping you on your toes. It's funny. This borderline tongue-in-cheek interrogation of the self and the ability to make up the self that you want to be. In which, speaking of enjoyable new movies, Megaopolis was one I was incredibly excited to see, just because I knew there was no way it was going to be good. And it was a movie that it makes you do this. It's a lot. It's maximalist. It's completely off the wall, and sometimes it feels self-aware enough that it does feel like it's partially in on its own joke, but also it wears its heart on its sleeve, and it's a bleeding heart. And it really was the most memorable theater experience I had this year, even alongside Dune, just because it was so itself. The performances are bad, but they're also extra. I mean, like, for lack of a better word, it's a ridiculous movie. A movie like this is never ever going to get made again, and it was never going to get made before. It was a movie of the moment, and it was a moment that was a long time coming for Francis Ford Coppola, and I'm glad it exists, but the end product is not particularly well made, and it's got a lot of very clumsy production decisions, from the effects to the editing to the staging of certain scenes, that makes it feel weirdly more amateur than it should, from someone like Coppola. I got two more here. Love Lies Bleeding I thought it was kind of a letdown aesthetically. It's really cool. The two leads are really great, but it's only particularly noteworthy when it really just swings for the fence. But it's like the kind of swing where it's like a kid, and he like swings so hard he misses the ball horribly, and he spins around and then trips over himself. It's not very graceful. A lot of people do love it, and I appreciate what it's going for, and I totally get the people who love it. For me, it just kind of left me feeling like, okay, man. Wicked, I thought it was decent. Really, my main problem is like the production of the movie is great. The costumes are great, the sets are great, but the way it's captured feels so artificial and like disconnected. Like, it's kind of disheartening that it's so almost apathetic about like the world it's portraying, because there are some scenes where it like really comes to life. And when I'm talking about this, I'm talking about the camera work, I'm talking about the editing and the color grading. And people like to dismiss color grading as a critique, but it really is important to creating a vibe for a movie. And you've got this wonderful work that people have done on the sets, and they just wash it out in post, and it's a tragedy. But nevertheless, it's a perfectly entertaining movie. As someone who wasn't really familiar with the story of Wicked, I thought it was kind of neat that it goes directions it goes, but that was more just my amusement with the concepts it played with, not so much how they were executed. It's a movie I'm largely indifferent about, but I did enjoy. And then the last new release was the Beatles 64 documentary, which I thought was just an absolute treat. The Beatlemania stuff is really cool. I love how it's all mostly focused on just the intense reaction that people had of it, just both in the very infantile and like outrageous screaming fans that you get, the hysteria behind it, but also these talking heads where people are just like passionately talking about what a big moment it was in their lives and culturally when, you know, those four fellas came to America. And I was absolutely thrilled to see David Lynch pop up in the movie because I was not expecting that. That was the last place I expected to see him, was in a documentary like this, and it made my fucking day. Before I move on to TV shows, I want to shout out some of the best movies I watched for the first time this year. It was a light year for me on this. It's probably the least amount of movies I've watched since I was like 15, which is crazy, but I'm not that old. I'm only 20, so that's not that big of a stretch of time. The first one is Finding Frances. This is kind of like the finale, and kind of like it is the finale for Nathan For You, and it's one I watched at like the very beginning of this year, and it's stuck with me ever since then. It's very touching, but it's also very ridiculous and off-putting in the way Nathan Fielder is. I just can't believe this sort of story was extracted in the way that it was. Like, if you really gotta watch all of Nathan For You just to get to it, it's worth it, because Nathan For You is a great show anyway. If you just want to hit the highlights and then watch this movie, do it. It's amazing. Then we got Howl's Moving Castle, which is a very special movie that I watched it when I did, but also it's just a damn fine movie. It's hard not to get wrapped up in the joy and the whimsy of Hayao Miyazaki's movies. I watched The Zone of Interest, and this movie is off-putting to a lot of people, and I completely get why, because it takes a perspective. I shouldn't laugh at that. It's not funny. It's very serious. You know, it takes a perspective at a point in history, and a lot of people think that it's wrong-headed to take that perspective. And to me, I think it's so beautifully articulate of the point the movie's trying to make, is that, like, and that's that terror and evil is often mundane as hell, and the people committing it are often indifferent to it. And I really do believe it's an incredible and very sobering piece of work. And then also, kind of weird putting this next to Zone of Interest. I understand it. A Serious Man by the Coen brothers. It's kind of the ones you don't hear about often, but it's often cited. It's kind of like one of the more underrated movies in their filmography, and I really was fascinated by it. It feels like this kind of puzzle, like a puzzle written on like a piece of paper that's been crumbled up, and you're like uncrumbling the paper, trying to read the puzzle. Then you finally get it uncrumbled, and it's like you're just looking at it, and it still doesn't quite make sense. The ending of the movie is so jarring, and I think it's brilliant. It was just one of my favorite movie experiences I had this year. So now switching over to the world of TV, probably the biggest one. The biggest one this year was House of the Dragon Season 2. I made a video about Game of Thrones. I briefly talk about it there. I allude to it. Season 2 was an undeniable step down from Season 1, and there's extra drama because George R.R. Martin, you know, the author of the books, came out against it, and he's very unhappy with the changes that's been made to the story. Personally, I do think the season was kind of awkward in areas, sluggish in others. There's been rumors and talks of budget cuts and the shrinking of the season's episode count. And if that's the case, and I do believe that, just off the finished product, it does feel kind of off balance in a way Season 1 didn't, but I think there's a lot of great stuff here. Beautifully shot still, the acting is incredible, and I still thought it was a very solid season of television, but just a noticeable step down from Season 1. The other new show from this year that I watched was, or at least started, was Netflix's Avatar: The Last Airbender, which I thought was, like, I guess most people saw it. I did not think it was good. I dropped it after episode 3. I really don't expect to pick it back up. It just feels, it's not. But on the flip side, I did rewatch Avatar: The Last Airbender, and it holds up beautifully. It's a beautiful show. It's one of the best pieces of art ever made. I do believe that. I did start My Hero Academia, which I think it's been a very fun show. It's not the deepest anime in the world. It's just so endearing and heartfelt. Like, it just feels like a show concocted out of just amalgamation of inspiration and love for the things that inspired its creator, I assume. I don't know that much about the production of the show. That's just the impression I get from it. And it's just a joy to watch. It's just super heartfelt. It makes you feel good when you watch it. It's that kind of like very on the nose kind of inspirational kind of thing, but it's done with this sort of like assuredness that makes it compelling. And it's got so many moments that I've seen that's just like, Yeah. How To with John Wilson. It's a one-of-a-kind kind of show. It is in that Nathan Fielder vein. He was a producer on the show. The random detours the stories make on that show. It's the work of a very sensitive artist, I'll say that. It's that kind of sit in your room, sit in your apartment, sit on the chair, look at the wall, and just kind of reflect on your day kind of show. Let's talk about music. It's a big year for music. Whew, I got some good stuff here. The musical highlight of the year for me personally was back in May, I saw the Lemon Twigs perform live in Charlottesville, and it was a wonderful experience. I was basically like right up at the stage. My ears, let's just say this, my ears felt horrible after the show, but it was so amazing. Their energy on stage is incredible. They're swapping instruments left and right. Like they've got their shit together, and it was amazing to watch, and they sound just as good live as they did on their albums. They released an album this year called A Dream Is All We Know. They do this great 60s revival kind of sound, 60s to kind of early to mid 70s revival sound, and this album specifically takes so much from the Beach Boy style, and I think it replicates it very beautifully. The song How Can I Love Her More is a contender for my favorite of the year. It's not my favorite of the year, contender for my favorite song of the year. It was a big year for people kind of going back to a more analog and classic sound, and this is the kind of stuff I'm excited about. My favorite album of the year was Russell Boring by Joba. It's beautiful. It's a wonderfully produced and arranged album. His vocals are amazing because he does lean heavily on his influences here, but Joba is Joba. If you've heard his contributions to Brockhampton, then he's got just this one-of-a-kind energy to him, and he does enough to bring his own personality, because his personality is simply too loud to drown in his influences. My song of the year was People Need People. It's just got that beautiful kind of reaching out to the world kind of vibe to it, and he sings about this beautiful feeling of not needing somebody to be there for you, but offering to be the person for someone else, to long to be the one for someone else and as many people as he can. Clairo came out this year with a new album called Charm. It's not quite as moody as her last album, and it's got this very playful vibe, and living up to its name, it's a very charming album. Tyler, the Creator, had a big album come out. I mean, any album he releases is big, Chromacopia, and I get the sense I need to listen to it some more. I thought it was good, and it's got some great moments on it, but it didn't really click with me or excite me all that much. I think Saint Chroma, which is the first song, is the best song on the album. Definitely going to be one that I continue to come back to just to kind of figure out what it's all about. Charlie XCX had a massive year this year with Brat, and she pulls off a lot of stuff here that's very impressive. Definitely, I wouldn't call it close to a 10 out of 10, but I totally get the enthusiasm people feel about it. My personal pick for pop album of the year, though, has got to go to Billie Eilish. I thought Hit Me Hard, Hit Me Soft was a wonderful album and a massive step up from her sophomore release. Still not quite as good as her debut album, but there's a maturity in her songwriting, the more stripped back vibe of it complements the album more than it hinders it, but you also get a lot of cool stuff like The Diner, which I think is a really cool spot for its production. That one song with the French title I think is arguably the best work of her career so far, just for how varied it is and just the more confident and mature approach in the way she does it vocally, and it just worked beautifully, and I have never been more excited to see what she does next. Let's talk about books. Let's talk about reading. What did I do this year? Weak year for reading. I got stuck on a Clash of Kings for a good chunk of this year just because I was only able to read it intermittently, and it's such a long book, but I thought it was wonderful. It was beautiful. Again, I talked about it in my Game of Thrones video. It's great. What else did I read? Shadow of the Sith by Adam Christopher I thought was really interesting in areas. It kind of drug in other areas. The lore expansions that it does and the tie-ins that it has I think are beautifully done. They're very engaging. There's this incredible side story that takes place within the book about this ancient Sith Lord, and that stuff, it's unexpectedly kind of gruesome in a way, and it was so cool to read about. And I think this book has the arguably, excluding The Last Jedi, because that really is like a tone animal, the best portrayal of Luke when he's still connected to that original trilogy iteration of him. This is very much him in between Return of the Jedi and Last Jedi. He's slowing down, he's getting a little older, a little more tired, but he's still got that kind of Luke Skywalker pluckiness to him, and it just felt so true to what you know that character to be. And Lando is the standout in this book. He is beautifully written. He has the most touching arc in the book. It really makes you feel for him in a way that no other Star Wars media has done. A significant portion of the book focuses on Rey's parents, and it just feels their sections of the book just feel shallower, very on the nose, very cringy. He looks at her and he remembers. He loves her so much. that kind of writing. And it's boring. A lot of it's very boring, and it makes me roll my eyes a little bit. But when the book is working and it's good, it's great. And the way their story ends particularly, I think it's very well written. I've been doing a ton of driving this year, more driving than I should. But because of that, I've been able to listen to audiobooks. I love my car so much, but I don't have anything to hook my phone up to the speakers. It's a 2010 Honda Civic, all right? I don't want to buy a wire, so I just play it right out of my phone while I'm driving. I listen to FDR by Gene Edward Smith. It's a big biography about him. It was 36 hours long, and it's so detailed. It's very thorough, but it just paints such a very vivid portrait of the dude, flaws and all, and it was just a incredibly compelling and captivating, I was going to say read, but listening experience. It effectively makes you feel like you understand the broad issues of the Great Depression and World War II. In fact, if I had to say one thing against the book, is that once it does get into World War II, it spends a lot of time rattling off what this commander and that commander was doing, when really the most interesting part of the book is, FDR. And he kind of gets lost in the shuffle, but you could say that's just the nature of the point in history it was covering. And I did think the Great Depression aspects of the book was the most interesting. But overall, it was a wonderful listen, and I would recommend it to anybody. Currently, I'm listening to Thomas Jefferson, The Art of Power by John Meacham, I want to say. I just think Thomas Jefferson is one of the most fascinating historical figures for how just frankly shitty he was in so many ways. He is so contradictory, but his passion, vision for the country is probably the most vivid out of any of our presidents or political figures. Again, FDR is one that comes to mind, just because I'm on these two right now because of these books. But this book so far, I'm only about 6 hours into it, but it does a good job at recounting the time in a way that's very intuitively understandable. It's got a very nice peppering of writings of Jefferson's, like letters and stuff like that, and it feels like you are kind of getting the broad strokes of his life. It's just very interesting and fascinating so far. Video games. Sound like a broken record. I didn't have a lot of time for video games this year. I played a decent amount of Team Fortress 2. This was the year they really cracked down on the bot crisis, and I appreciated that. I got really into Shogun Total War for the first time. I played a little bit last year, but I really got into it this year. I'm awful at sieging, but the rest of the game is really fun. And I played the hell out of Civilization 4. I might buy Civ 7 when it comes out. I'm more tempted to buy Civ 5, honestly, but Civ 4, it's just satisfying, and I love that kind of like mid-2000s PC game aesthetic. And then I also played Oblivion. I started playing Oblivion again very recently. Oh, what did I build myself as? A high elf, which is bad because I'm weak to all magic, but it's fun. I'm having a really good time with it. Those are the most interesting stuff I watched, listened to, played. It's been a very, very good and important year, and I'm thrilled with a lot of the work I've done, stuff I want to share between the short film, which is about bread, and I'm sure you can appreciate that. It's about bread. Just straight off the bat, I mean, like, this video probably has a very fatigued tone to it, because I am very fatigued right now. But dear Lord, I mean, things have never been looking better, not in terms of the film industry or the world, but for me personally, which is really what matters. and I'll say this is like for anyone who would ever listen to anything I have to say, take the time, put in the groundwork, plant your seeds, and fucking, not in the way you might be thinking or hoping, but like plant the seeds of your work and your labor, and cultivate them, and do not rush to put stuff out, because I've spent all year prepping basically, and this is just like the first inkling of that the past few videos, and I've been amazed by the reception to them. I really expected them to just come out and not do much of anything, and I'm recording this at the beginning of the video. I will probably cut it and splice it in at the end, just because this is not really appropriate for the beginning of the video. But I've just been amazed by the reception so far, and I'm absolutely going to be here for the entirety of 2025, and I eventually want to get myself up to doing 2 uploads a month, and I'm not going to promise on that. And part of the compromise I made with myself is that if I have projects in the works that warrant extra time, then I'm going to give them extra time. If you want to stick around with this channel, I really do believe there'll be some stuff that you'll look at and be like, yeah, that was interesting. Look at me. You don't get Actually, the bags don't look too bad. You don't get these kind of bags under your eyes unless you wake up at 2 a.m. and work for 8 hours and then spend more hours driving around